Next to the crisis in Niger, we have some late breaking news about diplomatic efforts on the part of the regional bloc known as ECOWAS. A spokesperson for the group's parliament says it aims to send a committee to Niger to meet coup leaders who took power last month. Now, ECOWAS has already said it's putting together a standby military force to restore democratic rule in the country. In a separate development, there's word that religious chiefs from Nigeria are traveling to Niger to meet with the coup leaders as well. In the meantime, Niger's democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum, was taken into custody by the junta 2 weeks ago. He has been reportedly seen by a doctor amid concerns about his health. Here's Niger's ambassador to the U.S. speaking earlier.
To detain head of state who has been democratically elected and to deprive him from food, this is not something acceptable. I am calling on to the United States to do everything they can to stop this situation.
And for more on the story, I'm joined by Isabelle Trick, an associate director at the Global Counsel. Thanks so much for joining us again here on France 24. First of all, we've seen the real threat of military action in Niger by ECOWAS, but in spite of that, there are diplomatic efforts underway. How optimistic are you that there can be a diplomatic solution?
It is evident that a diplomatic solution is everyone's preferred outcome. When ECOWAS held its special summit in Abuja on Thursday, the final declaration did mention the activation and deployment of the standby force, but it equally emphasized that all diplomatic means would be pursued as well. The protests that we've seen in Niger over the last couple of days against military intervention have surely only re-emphasized how important it is to exhaust all diplomatic options. How confident am I that this is going to succeed? It's very uncertain right now. Up until now, the military junta has proven itself very resistant to any diplomatic engagement. It's refused to see various delegations sent by the AU, the African Union, the United Nations, and others. So whether this will change, maybe the threat of military intervention might change their minds.
What we heard there from Niger's ambassador to the U.S. describing just the conditions that President Bazoum has been subjected to, if the reports are accurate, we're talking about a democratically elected leader who's been detained and deprived of basic foods, basic things like food and water. What kind of pressure is there on Niger's democratic allies to step in and act?
I think the pressure is mounting. The longer the situation goes on, the more challenging it becomes for President Bazoum and his family. He emphasized in the last few days that his son is poorly, that his son needs to see a doctor. He has a heart condition, and it certainly is increasing pressure on allies. And I think we can really see how that pressure is being felt by ECOWAS, which is why there has been this renewed diplomatic effort launched today.
We should remind our viewers that the U.S. and France both have troops in Niger. What role do you see those two countries playing, whether that be on the diplomatic front or the military front?
Yes, France has about 1,100 troops in the country. The US has a few more. So far, I wouldn't expect either country to act militarily. There is a real desire to see a greater emphasis on African solutions for African problems, which is something we have heard from African leaders a lot over the last few years. And I think if either the US or France were to engage militarily, that would only reinforce the junta's arguments that these foreign powers are interfering in Niger's foreign affairs and internal affairs. So I don't expect them to do much right now. Both countries have expressed their support for ECOWAS efforts and have really been pursuing diplomatic avenues. And I would expect that to be the case for going forward over the next few weeks.
You mentioned the protests. In the last 24 hours, we've seen people in Niger take to the streets in support of the coup leaders. Can you help explain what public sentiment is like in the country and why there is this kind of support for overthrowing democracy?
We're facing an interesting situation here in that most of the images we're getting and most of the reporting we're seeing is from the capital, Niamey, which has historically been an opposition stronghold where President Bazoum wasn't as popular. We're hearing much less from other parts of the country. And for instance, we have seen a former a current Nigerian politician, but former Tuareg rebel leader, launching an internal grouping, an internal force, trying to gather an internal force to oppose the military junta. So it is certainly not universal support for the military coup that we have seen. But equally, it was clear that there has been a huge level of dissatisfaction, economic hardship that people have been experiencing, and a sense that things weren't going in the right direction, which has now expressed itself in this coup.
Yeah, Niger is one of the world's poorest countries. Can you just say a word about the humanitarian situation in the country at the moment?
Yes, Niger, even before the military coup and before the sanctions that ECOWAS has now imposed, was, as you say, one of the poorest countries in the world. The US has now suspended humanitarian aid, and the pictures you're showing right now show trucks lining up at the border between Niger and Benin. So the humanitarian situation is only getting worse because of the sanctions ECOWAS has imposed. It has cut Niger off from Nigeria and Benin, two of its most important trade and import and export partners. So costs are higher. It's only going to get more challenging. And I think that's only going to increase public discontent in Niger.
Okay, Isabelle Trick, Associate Director at the Global Counsel. Thanks as always for your insight and for joining us here on France 24.